Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to another exciting session of Avid Online. I hope all of you have been staying safe and have been tuning in to Avid Online's online episodes and live sessions. For those who haven't attended an Avid program before, a very special welcome to you. And for more information about the work that we do, please refer to the chat section, and also more information about our wonderful partners have been posted there. Over the past few months, as the pandemic did not permit us to program our regular events, we evolved our presence online, and we joined a large number of institutions and other creative and cultural platforms to continue to spread the positive message of the arts and the boundless knowledge and inspiration they bring by going online. Avid Online, our digital further learning campaign, was launched across social media platforms on the 1st of April 2020. The objective was to enable our patrons and stakeholders like yourselves to engage across the breadth of the arts. And to focus of this campaign was to keep members of the creative community connected, facilitate interaction, and exchange of ideas. Now we're well into our 5th month, and we've curated and published over 100 programs. In fact, tonight is our 110th program, a mix of live sessions and Avid Online videos. We're still going strong, and we feel so grateful to our speakers and experts who contributed their voices thus so far. And to you, our interested audiences who have embraced us in our newest avatar and continue to come back, tune in, and learn with us, validating our mantra that learning never stops. In fact, today's session is a part of an exciting virtual week from the silver screen to your screen, dedicated to discovering the diverse aspects from critiquing to film appreciation, to documentary for social change, and screenwriting for the digital platform. I hope you've caught some of our fascinating videos we've showcased on the subject so far. And that brings me to this evening's discussion. Welcome to Documentary Film Festivals and Social Change, presented by the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai and Avid Learning as part of our virtual week dedicated to all things film. President of HotDocs Film Festival, Chris Mcdonald, will be in conversation with film journalist Nandini Ramnath. Welcome to you both. They will speak on the role of documentary films and festivals as a powerful platform to instrument change on ground and expand their reach and impact in the world and for issues they showcase and support. The HotDocs International Documentary Film Festival, as some of you may know, is North America's largest documentary festival, conference, and market. Each year, the festival presents a selection of approximately 200 documentary, cutting-edge documentary films from Canada and across the globe. For more about Chris and Nandini, please refer to the bios that have been posted in the chat section. Please note the discussion will last about an hour, followed by a Q&A. So please post your questions in the Q&A box, and Nandini will be happy to address them. Thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Nandini, and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you, Avid. And it's a real honor to be here to talk to Chris Mcdonald about documentary practices and the future of festivals. I watched my first documentaries on the national broadcaster Doordarshan in the 80s. I saw them on the big screen at festivals only many years later. At least for me, the experience of documentary watching is very personal and very intimate. Chris, may I begin by asking you where you first encountered documentaries, and what was it about them that made you want to dedicate your career to them?
Good morning from just outside Toronto, Nandini and Asad. Thank you. It's nice to be back with you folks. So in Canada, we have the National Film Board, which is our national film organization focusing mainly on documentaries and animation. So as kids, we all watched documentaries in school. And some of them were probably over our heads. Some of them were not terribly interesting to us. I always remember when we watched a film, you'd ask on a projector, you'd ask the teacher to play it backwards. That was the highlight of watching any documentary. They rarely said yes, but it was magical when they did. So documentaries had this connotation as we became older, that they were like, I don't know if you, there's probably an equivalent in India, but we kids used to get fed cod liver oil. It was something for your blood, or so we said that documentaries were like cod liver oil. They tasted bad, but they were good for you. So my first recollections of documentaries, not particularly noteworthy, but as I grew up and went through high school and then studied film in university, I fell in love with cinema, actually from a young age, and documentaries from I guess my late teens and early 20s, and haven't looked back, so to speak.
So, like many people who went to film school, you could have gravitated towards feature filmmaking. What was it about nonfiction, broadly speaking, that the documentaries are about that kept you there?
I guess it was the learning that documentaries provided. They were a great window onto a world, and sometimes a world I wasn't familiar with. Even a mediocre documentary contains a lot of information that I, anyway, didn't know, generally speaking. I love different perspectives. I'm very curious. I'm the type of person, who enjoy, when I'm in public, I don't mind overhearing strangers talking because I'm nosy. So documentaries also provide a bit of voyeuristic thrill. But obviously there's also, there's so many different types of documentaries, from personal to diary films, to investigative films, to survey films. There's really something, sometimes films are just about, as I say, your crazy uncle. And they can be interesting. But the heart of documentaries has always been centered around human rights, social justice, civil society. And that's something that's appealed to me as a human. But documentaries provide so many. You can make a documentary about anything, almost literally about anything. Music, culture, art, artists, history, politics, human rights, social justice, as I mentioned. So there's just so much to offer. And I would say that when I used to work at a national film and television school in Canada, and when I went to HotDocs, it was just at the beginning of the period where documentaries were really enjoying a renaissance and really changing in terms of the impact that technology was having on them, and their just broader appeal as different platforms became available, as festivals, traditionally fiction film festivals, started to include more documentaries in their programming, like Toronto and Sundance and any number of other festivals. And then we started to see the birth of documentary festivals, where they only screen documentaries. And India has a couple of great ones, of course. So it was great timing for me personally, because I've been with HotDocs over 20 years and it's grown a lot. And I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time.
When did you start seeing Indian films traveling through the world to festivals like HotDocs, for instance? When you joined HotDocs in 1998, were there already Indian films being shown there?
Yeah, sorry, I've done something dumb. And there you are, sorry. I tried to I wanted to turn off my email so it wasn't binging, and then I lost you and had a little heart attack. But there you are. Interesting question. We've done retrospectives on Anand Patwardhan, for instance, and we've had Indian documentaries over the years at HotDocs. But certainly the number and the quality of docs has increased dramatically in recent years, which we found very interesting because India obviously has the world's largest film industry. yet relatively speaking, one of the smallest documentary industries, focused industries. So a lot of your filmmakers, not many of your filmmakers were making documentaries, and that's definitely changed in the last 10 years. And it's also interesting because India has always been such a great subject for documentary filmmakers. It has attracted Western doc makers for generations, as providing so much great source material for documentaries about any number of subjects. But we weren't seeing Indian filmmakers making those films. And I'm happy to say that that has changed, because that's a priority for HotDocs in terms of its own programming. We shy away from films that are made by filmmakers who aren't local. Now that doesn't say we don't screen films by a Japanese filmmaker on Kenya, but ideally there's a local filmmaker telling a local story. So I'm really happy with the number of great Indian filmmakers who have now turned their attention to documentary, and we can hear from them what's going on, because it's always more impactful when the story is told with a personal connection to the subject. And that's something that we have focused on, as I've said. So when filmmakers submit to HotDocs, they're always asked, when they fill in their submission form, what is your relation to the subject? And we're really trying to accomplish what I just spoke about, which is encouraging local storytellers or people who have an authentic relationship with the subject. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, but it's more of a guiding principle for us. We very much want, as I've said. And documentaries also lend themselves in their long form to examinations of subjects, and they shine lights on dark corners of society. It's great to have sort of a non-corporate take on a given subject. There's all sorts of reasons why I believe documentaries that are free of any agenda. It's very much a filmmaker's point of view. It's not corporate media who are packaging a message into a 40-second story on an international news channel. It's a long look at something that is important to the filmmaker. And that's always a better place to start.
I'll come to a couple of the issues that you've raised a little later, but HotDocs had to go online this year because of the novel coronavirus pandemic. What was the experience like? You've never done an entirely virtual edition before. So if you could share with us what it was like.
Sure. It was not fun. But oddly enough, or coincidentally, I was around, as were some of my colleagues, during the SARS pandemic. And it impacted Toronto significantly. So I think it was 2003, the World Health Organization put Toronto on its no-fly list. So we've actually dealt with massive cancellations before, but the festival went on that year. In fact, the public festival, and audiences were record-breaking at the time, and people didn't shy away from coming, but international delegates, most of our international delegates didn't attend. So in terms of mid-March of this year, it happened so fast. We had to close our cinema, and I'll back up a little bit and say that HotDocs also runs a 700-seat documentary-focused cinema. So it's the biggest cinema in Toronto. It is one of the world's first documentary-focused cinemas, and we were actually averaging 800 people a day. So it's been open for 9 years, and it has been tremendously successful. We have wonderful audiences in Toronto. There's a huge appetite for feature-length documentaries and information and ideas, and there's a real community that's built up that came out of the festival, because the festival is a large festival, market, and conference, as Asad said. And we were when we opened our cinema, didn't know if anybody was going to come, didn't know, what was going to happen. And we had a wonderful benefactor who helped support its opening. So all that, back to your question, we had to close the cinema because cinemas were closing across the city. And then we had to make the really quick decision to cancel the live festival and put it online, which took, it took some weeks to get organized. And then we also have a large market event at HotDocs. So we have each year 3,000 delegates from around the world who come to Toronto and pitch their projects and try to raise financing, try to sell projects, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously that couldn't happen, but that could go online. So there were sort of three things happening. We put the cinema's first run documentary films online for the first time. We had to transition all the market events, so all those buyers, hundreds and hundreds of buyers who were coming to Toronto, as well as thousands of filmmakers, and create meetings for them and a platform and a space for them to continue to do business. And that happened beautifully. And then we had to put the festival online. So that was a bit more challenging in some ways because there were 200 plus films that had been invited to the festival. We had to go back to each of those filmmakers and ask if they wanted to be part of a pilot project for us, which was putting the films online. And there were questions around geo-blocking. So is the film available across Canada? Is it available internationally? How are you going to protect my film? What do you mean you're going to put it online? What guarantee do I have it's not going to be pirated? So we had to work with a third party, a partner who helped us create the platform to ensure that it was safe for filmmakers. We introduced, we had the films were only available to screen in Ontario, which is one of our provinces in Canada. It was just simpler not to compete with other great documentary festivals in this country, or it just seemed a safer way to negotiate with distributors and rights holders if we said, look, we're going to contain, we're going to geo-block your film so only the 15 million people in Ontario can watch it. And I would say there were 150 features invited, and I think about 100 agreed to participate in the online screening for HotDocs. And if this isn't too boring, we also had to negotiate with the filmmakers because a lot of festivals, and I'll go back a bit, maybe I know a lot of your audience are industry folks. There's all sorts of different film festivals in the world. Ours is a not-for-profit charitable organization. We have a board of directors. Some festivals like IFFI are government run. Ours is not. But we had to make sure that the filmmakers, we don't pay screening fees to filmmakers because when you're invited to HotDocs, we will fly you in. If you've got a mid-length or a feature-length film, we'll fly you to Toronto. We'll put you up in a hotel. We'll make sure you're looked after. We'll feed you and give you some drinks. And your film also has the opportunity to be seen by dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of other festivals, buyers, certainly hundreds of buyers, distributors, et cetera. So there's a financial incentive for you to come to HotDocs. So we don't pay screening fees like a lot of festivals have to, which makes sense. We make the case that it's good business for your film to come to HotDocs, and we'll fly you here and pay, et cetera. So when you can't offer people, audiences of tens of hundreds of thousands, buyers, et cetera. So we had to come up with a fair revenue share with the rights holders, filmmakers. So about 100 of the 150 folks agreed to participate. We had to do 100, therefore, Q&As with all of those filmmakers, so that when you downloaded your film at home, we try to recreate as much as possible the festival experience. So you're seeing a film, and then you're hearing from the filmmaker with one of our curators, programmers, et cetera. So that all took a long time. And I know some other festivals were able to pull that pivot off quickly. But it was really important for us to get it right. Not suggesting others didn't get it right, but it was a big process, and we're really proud of the results. And we had over 100,000 people attend our online festival. Again, screened 100 films, and we wanted to respect the filmmakers and all the work that they'd put into these films, and to celebrate them in some way if they wanted to. Other filmmakers had to make the the creative and the professional decision, what's best for my film? It might be best to wait for Mammy in the fall or Venice at the end of summer. You don't want to ruin your world premiere if you don't have to. So there were a lot of considerations at play. Happy to say it went well. And we learned an awful lot. Also, I'm sorry, is this boring?
No, I'm curious about the main learnings
Good.
from going virtual, because there is a possibility, if there's no vaccine or if this pandemic continues, that people might have to even do this next year. So would you do the same thing next year if you had to?
I don't think we wouldn't go back to 100% in cinema festival, because we've discovered that there is a percentage of our audience, maybe 15, 20%, who actually prefer watching films at home. There's lots of reasons, excessive age, accessibility, etc. So I can always see a hybrid festival going forward, a hybrid festival of some kind, but nothing is going to replicate the experience of being in a cinema watching the big screen with hundreds of strangers, or doing business at a festival. The face-to-face, nothing's come along to replace face-to-face contact in a networking environment to do business.
So the industry, of course, as you've talked about, the industry market is a crucial part of HotDocs, and you managed to carry that off. What are some of the international best practices for documentary at the moment, given that there are severe restrictions on funding? Lots of people are, holding back on producing films, picking up films, and so on. Take, for instance, pitching for funding. Let's say I want to make a documentary about the Bombay Plague of 1896, which is suddenly relevant all over again. If I came to HotDocs with a proposal, what advice would you give me?
Well, there's good questions you could ask. Why are you making this film? I.e., what's your connection to the subject? Why now? I think is a good question that investors would want to know. As you say, this plague is relevant for such, because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So that's a good. Why you? Why now? And why this story? I think are important questions. I think looking at your work as a filmmaker, let's say, and me as an investor would be something that I would be interested in. What's happened to your other works? Who are you working with on this project? What's the financing structure? What are your plans for the film? What's the film going to look like? How's it going to feel? What type of documentary is it? Again, is it a survey film? Is it an investigative film? Are there characters that the audience can relate to? I think ultimately for me as a part-time programmer, very part-time, is films, audience needs to have an emotional connection with the film. They've got to have some kind of the film has to have an impact on them in an emotional way. So I would look for something like that as well. Lots of different things to look at. And what's happened in the industry over the years is it's become increasingly difficult to finance a film, and this has been going on for decades, financing a film in one country alone. So if you're working with a Japanese broadcaster, public broadcaster, you also need to raise money from different public broadcasters around the world, which is why when you see a lot of documentaries, there's there's 5 or 6 different countries sometimes who have partnered on the financing. So that's again why events like the Good Pitch that I know you've had in Mumbai, and the HotDocs Forum, the Forum in Amsterdam, are important events for filmmakers to raise money. So I think that's the longer term concern, is that, not having these live, we organized hundreds and hundreds of meetings between filmmakers and decision makers or financiers at broadcasters at HotDocs this year. And that was a big success. But again, there's nothing that's quite like sitting down with a coffee face to face with somebody, hearing about their project.
So yeah, co-productions are vital for documentaries to be made, but there's increasingly a great deal of debate about the politics of representation. the agendas of funders. What in your experience is a good way to ensure that you make what you want to make while also gaining an international audience for your work, that you hold on to your integrity and your politics without being influenced by the politics of the funders or the producers?
Yeah, you don't want to have any influence from your funders, basically. Ideally, I know it's not always the case, but I think programmers. Well, let me speak from as a festival organizer and a part-time programmer. We watch for those nuances in the storytelling, and it is not interesting at all for festivals who are serious about curation to program anything that has anyone's point of view other than the filmmakers. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make those films and you can't get them financed. I don't think they're going to be programmed at any serious festival if there is there's a corporate investor imprint on that's influencing the content of the film. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Will the pandemic, I know it's a broad question, but will the pandemic affect more artistic experimental films that may not, for instance, strike this emotional chord that you spoke of? Slightly more avant-garde films, which always struggle in any case and need festivals very badly to be showcased. If so many festivals are cancelled or go online, and what happens to the more difficult films that don't instantly connect in a sense but really need to be made?
It's a good question, because the other reality is that the viewership for online festivals and online cinemas like ours have been greatly reduced. So even if a festival is going online, their numbers are, I'm going to guess, half of what they normally were. So it's going to be even more challenging for experimental works, I think. At the same time, events like the pandemic create opportunities in places that we don't imagine. Humans are very bad at predicting the future. So there may be some things that come out of the change in human behavior that the pandemic has caused, that can actually benefit people in ways we don't realize. So, there may be, having all this increase in viewership online might help those smaller experimental films in some unanticipated way.
Well, we live in hope. Streaming services, some of us watch documentaries. A certain kind of mainstream documentary shows up on streaming services like Netflix and Amazon in India. Do you think they are paying more attention to documentaries? Is documentaries now part of their programming as well, or do they gravitate only towards certain genres? Crime, for instance, or
What was for instance? Sorry.
Streaming services, streaming platforms.
Oh yeah.
Like Netflix and Amazon.
Yeah, sure. No, the documentaries are finding a happy home at those services. You'll notice they are increasing in number, and anecdotally in the buzz and the things that we're hearing. So, I mean, they have changed the landscape and the marketplace for documentaries. And that's a marketplace, by the way, that's been changing dramatically for the last 25 years. So this is nothing new, this dynamic environment, marketplace. But you're seeing really big sales to Apple and Amazon and Prime, et cetera. And you're seeing lots of great films get great platforms. So ultimately, I think it's good for this particular art form. I know that there are challenges. I know that a lot of the English language services feel that their viewers shy away from subtitles, for instance. So how do we make audiences more comfortable with subtitles is a challenge. But anyway, definitely Netflix and Prime and those other platforms you mentioned, I think have been good, but not without their challenges for the filmmakers.
Will people pay more for watching documentaries? Because at least in India especially, we get most documentaries free. We watch them at festivals or at cultural events. It's hard enough sometimes getting people to pay for art house cinema features. But perhaps one outcome of the pandemic could be that people realize that you need to start paying for documentaries as well in some form.
Well, I've had a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, when the pandemic first started, I part of me felt like documentaries were vindicated and validated, and all the work that documentary filmmakers have been doing for generations was validated, because it was like, we told you this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, listen to scientists. Humans do have an impact on their world. Civil society is an important goal. How we treat each other is critical. So that's one. Sorry, what was the other part? What was I went off on a rant there, but your question was around.
No,
sorry.
Getting people to pay for documentaries. Yeah.
Right. Well, pre-pandemic, if we can go way back in time, as I said, our cinema was averaging 800 people a day, like remarkable numbers to see documentaries. So, and it was, I'll use US dollars, maybe $8 a ticket. And that was not, we were selling out. These great films coming from all over the world we were having wonderfully large audiences for. So I think the answer to your question is yes, people are willing to pay for documentaries. Then again, when you subscribe to something like Netflix or Prime, it sure is easy just to turn on the television and not have to, pay for a film at that moment. So that sort of transactional video on demand is a little more, obviously more challenging than having a subscription. But there's so much competition out there with the subscriber services that it's hard, I think, for festivals who want to go online. So our cinema's now still online, of course, first run films every week, new first run films. And I would say our viewership is down 80% from what it was when we were in the cinemas. And we often perform amongst the top 5 cinemas in North America. So we're doing with an 80% reduction in business, we're still number 1. So I fear for so many other cinemas that are unable to hit their targets. It's a challenge, and hopefully it's one that we're reopening our cinema hopefully in the next 5 or 6 weeks, and the unanswered question is, will people come back to cinemas, even though we will introduce all sorts of safety precautions and social distancing, etc. Will people want to come back? And here's another question: is will people want to actually pay more than $8 to see a film in a cinema? I would. I'm dying to go back to a cinema, and I want to go back to a cinema that is safe, of course, but it's my feeling that we've had very few. We're Ontario, with our 15 million people, is averaging 100 new cases a day. So it's and very low number of very low mortality rates. So I think we're ready to go back to public space. Obviously not in the same numbers, but the question is, maybe we can charge a little more to help offset some of these costs associated with keeping people as safe as possible.
I want to bring you to another aspect of filmmaking, to go back to a little bit about what you said about co-production. India and Canada have some kind of co-production agreement. Are there examples of a collaboration between India and Canada in the context of films made by both the countries that have really worked out?
I know that there are a couple of co-productions underway right now, India, Canada co-productions. Haven't seen the documentaries. I haven't seen those yet. Certainly a lot of great films made from Indo-Canadians, part of the diaspora. Nisha Pahuja's film, The World Before Her, obviously shot in India. I believe the year that it was released was the #1 theatrical documentary in your country, and it won awards all over the world and was acclaimed. Because We Are Girls, which we had at HotDocs last year, also made by Indo-Canadian expat Baljeet Sangra. And we're also seeing lots of Indian films that are not co-productions that we screen at HotDocs, which we can talk about more if you like. So yeah, the co-production treaty is a great opportunity, I think, for a lot of Indian and Canadian filmmakers to work together, and it's happening more and more in the documentary space. It's traditionally been part of the fiction world, but we're seeing more co-production, official treaty co-productions.
Okay. And we started off this discussion by talking about how documentaries were like castor oil. It's a lovely way of describing it. And then many of us really developed a taste for it and never sort of stopped loving it. Are there some documentaries that you keep going back to, that you rewatch, that have stayed with you over the years, that maybe you watched in different contexts, maybe at festivals as part of your job, and that sort of count in your head as classics?
Undoubtedly, so many. It's hard to think of a few. There's one film, and I'm going to forget the filmmaker's name and the subject's name, called The English Surgeon, about a British doctor who is a surgeon who, on all of his time off, would fly to a hospital in Kiev, I believe, and voluntarily perform surgeries because they were so woefully underfunded. That's one that's always stuck with me. I mean, I loved all the Albert Maysles films and D.A. Pennebaker. There's some brilliant Canadian filmmakers. That film, I talk a lot about that film, Menstrual Man. You know that film?
Yeah,
by Amit Vermani.
Yeah.
I talk about that film a lot. It's an Indian film about a social entrepreneur who manufactures low-cost and safe feminine hygiene products, sanitary.
So we had a feature inspired by the same subject by leading Bollywood star called Akshay Kumar, who's ironically a Canadian citizen. So there's another Indo-Canadian collaboration out there. It was called Padman. Yeah.
It's a fiction film.
Yeah, it's called Padman. So there you go. That's an interesting Indo-Canadian collaboration.
Did it do well?
Yeah, it did well.
I love that documentary so much because it ticks so many boxes, sorry to use that cliche, great message, simple advice. You could cut a trailer down for that film and make its message resound. Anyway, that's one. I mean, Blackfish, the great film about films about, obviously, I guess the ones about social impact stay with us. Blackfish, the film about the killer whales in marine parks in the United States, that really changed the way that people view that type of so-called entertainment. That had a real dramatic impact. There's a film called Sergio about a Brazilian UN senior official who led this incredibly heroic life. I love Werner Herzog's films. I love Hedy Hodegman. I love so many amazing filmmakers. There was a great, sorry, I did take notes, so I'm cheating a bit. You had a great short film called we had a great film called Tungris. Have you seen that?
Tungris. I wrote about it.
How did you pronounce it?
Tungris.
Tungris.
It's a name. It's the name of the rooster. Yeah.
Tungris, the family that adopt Tungris, the rooster, and live with this rooster. And short film. It was wonderful to have the filmmaker at HotDocs, and audiences went nuts. Like I sat in 700 people auditoriums with them, just rolling with laughter. So another one I loved came out a couple years ago, was called Game Changers. It's by the director of The Cove, that where he addressed the illegal killing of dolphins in the tuna hunt. But it's about plant-based diets. And I believe it's on Netflix. Very, very clever film. It's an environmental film. And what they do is, I guess they realize one of the easiest ways to impact the environment in a positive way is to change the way people eat. And the film states that, only 20% of vegetarians are men, are male. So how do we make a film with a message to men, stubborn men, that they're going to watch and pay attention to? So what he did was all of his subjects were elite athletes. And they were all talking about how their performance and endurance was impacted dramatically when they stopped eating animals. And so it appealed to men's vanity and virility and sense of masculinity. And I've watched so many people, spoken to so many people who've seen that film, guys who are like, I'm never eating meat again. It doesn't last, but some of it does. But it was a very, very clever way of if you want to make an environment, how can we make an environmental film that has impact? Well, let's make it about food. And how do we get men, who are, again, only 20% of the vegetarian population, how do you get men to actually watch it? And I know, let's make it about athletes. So anyway, it was a very clever way, I think, of getting their message across. And but I hundreds of documentaries I've loved over the years.
Well, what was the name of this film again, for the benefit of our...
Thank you. If I didn't mention it, Game Changer or
Game
Game Changers. Yeah.
Okay.
It's very compelling.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna, we've been getting a few questions.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just pick a few and read them out to you. Okay, here goes. Are you ready, Chris?
I'm ready.
Okay. Arti Kirloskar asks, with this pandemic, will documentaries on the environment or the reasons behind the pandemic become popular? And have you heard of any films currently being made on this subject?
On the environment? Yes, no doubt. As I said earlier, the pandemic was sort of like a moment in time when I think people who love documentaries and like science realized, oh, we predicted things like this would happen if we keep screwing around. An interesting thing, not to discourage anyone making films about the environment, but when we opened our cinema, we thought, because obviously our festival, we screened hundreds of films about the environment, and we just thought, oh, we opened a cinema, documentary cinema, all we have to do is just play environmental films every day and the place will be packed. No. People who are educated about, I'm talking theatrically, so this doesn't apply to festivals, nor does it apply to television, I've learned, but educated audiences who tend to make up most of the documentary crowd in terms of going to cinemas from our surveys, weren't gravitating towards films about the environment. And my short answer or a reason why was because they were educated on the subject already.
Right.
And felt that they didn't need to go and discover, the impacts of, human beings on climate and fossil fuels, et cetera. So it was sort of counterintuitive because again, I thought, oh, we'll just, so theatrically speaking, and this is different than television and it's different than festivals. Theatrically speaking, at our cinema, with a large cinema. So if we had a 100-seat cinema, I would love to play environmental films all the time. And when we had 50 people attend, that would be a good number. But with 700 people, you want to average 150 people at a screening, and it's hard to do with films about serious subject matter. Does not attract, unfortunately, yet huge audiences theatrically. It's different on television, it's different at festivals. So keep making those films, folks, but right now it's harder to get them to play in cinemas.
So I have
although some have had huge success at the same time. So there are one-offs and exceptions to the rule, like An Inconvenient Truth that you mentioned, something we talked about earlier, Blackfish. There are some that shine through, certainly. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, I had a slightly sort of tangential question to that, which is that how do you take documentaries beyond the converted and the already sort of ready audience? Because the whole challenge is to introduce a form which is very exciting, and people just don't realize how exciting documentary is. How do you pitch to the unconverted?
Well, I think that my example of Game Changers is a good one, right? They realized who do we want to, this is a social impact film specifically, but who do we want to impact? And again, which audience is going to have the biggest impact if they see this film? And in this case, it was men, and it was they were very clever, and they thought, well, I've never actually had this conversation with Louis, the director, but I do know him, and then I think they said, well, how do we get men to watch a film? How do we preach to the unconverted? And it was like, well, let's make it a film about sports stars. Let's have NBA basketball players and Olympic runners and, you know, a star female tennis player be the subjects of the film. So it's not, you know, it's not a boring talking head. It's something that's going to catch their eye. And if they're not ready as an audience member to sit down and watch a serious film, and I'm not saying Game Changers wasn't serious, but you trick the audience to a certain extent into getting them on board. When we started HotDocs, our first number of years, and nobody used to come. I mean, we now average about just under a quarter of a million people come to our 11-day festival. And the first year it was a couple of thousand, and which I found shocking, because I thought all you had to do at a festival was, you know, book a film, rent a cinema, put it up, and the place will be packed. No, you gotta work really hard to get that audience in the door. So our creative, our marketing creative for the festival posters at the time and such, were all used a surprise image. So it was never, you know, you never would show a starving child or the victim of a civil war on your poster and hope that the audience is going to come. We would deliberately put, you know, bright, cheerful images, interesting photos, let's say, but as a way of kind of tricking the audience into coming and seeing what we have, because we believed in, obviously, in documentaries and their power to change positively. But we realized we've got a little bit of a cod liver oil problem here. We've got to disabuse people of that notion, get them into the audience. And we have, I mean, the thousands of people that have come up to me and said how much they love these films and how these films have changed their lives it's beautiful. So there's a little bit of trickery every once in a while in getting people involved.
So there's a question by an anonymous attendee which says, how do platforms like yours and documentary festivals aid in connecting filmmakers, audiences, and active agents to change through social media campaigns and so on? Is there a specific campaign that you have that you did at HotDocs recently that perhaps you could explain it through? Like, that was in the example you gave was at the beginning, but more recently, was there some interesting social media campaign that you did that really brought people in or increased audiences or helped a film tremendously?
Sure. So I didn't freeze there, did I? Am I still good?
I think, yeah, but we can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, well, we work with, and we learned this early on, we work with hundreds and hundreds of different community groups, nonprofits, in the city, in our city, Toronto, so that when we program a film about the Sri Lankan Civil War, you know, we've got a dozen different organizations who we work with. So we'll blast them with information about the film, provide them with tickets, make the filmmaker allow the filmmaker to be available to their publications if it's a local community paper or something, access the filmmaker for interviews, for media, etc., and encourage their audience, their community to come out to the film. That's something that we've done forever because we realized early on it was such a challenge. It really is a challenge to get people to leave their houses at the best of times to go see a film. In terms of social impact campaigns, I mean, we have a very robust social media manager who their work is very robust. working with the traditional media outlets. I can't think specifically of a campaign that we did around a film. We very much let the films do the talking and encourage filmmakers to include links in their end credits about, ways in which they can become more involved in this particular subject. But I'll have to think more about a campaign. Sorry.
Right. Okay, Siddesh Mahagankar has a question which it's an interesting one because you've been talking about the theatrical experience of watching documentaries. Do documentaries made for a theatrical experience feel less impactful if watched on a phone or a tablet? It's a very important question, given that all of us are watching things on our iPads and laptops.
Nothing's going to replace the experience of watching a film in a cinema on a large format. Doesn't mean it can't have impact and can't resonate with people, but yeah, nothing. And it's funny because as an arts administrator, runs a large arts and cultural organization, you're always worried about impacts on your livelihood, existential threats to your organization, which the pandemic is certainly one. But I've worried about technology. Technology has helped the filmmaking industry so dramatically in the last 30 years, in the last 60 years, of course, when they moved to handheld cameras 50 years ago, that was a big jump. But so far, all the technological advances have helped our industry, filmmakers. And I was always getting worried as people's at home, their movie, their television experience, the at-home entertainment television experience has gotten better. Our televisions have grown. The sound quality has improved. And that always seemed to me as a potential existential threat to, cinema going. And it hasn't. There's really, it's a wonderful experience watching watching a film on a properly sized television. It's even better to watch it in a cinema. And nothing's changed that so far. Cinema is still number one.
Mm. Okay. This is a question specifically about India, about the best practices that can be implemented in a country like India. But maybe I'll ask you something by somebody called Reena. What are some of the issues that documentaries are not addressing and need to be talked about?
Well, that's a great question. Wow, what a good question. If you think about like politics, let's say, I don't know if any, censorship, I guess, would be the number one challenge that filmmakers face when you think about films that aren't being made. For instance, are there any filmmakers in Belarus right now who are able to actually safely shoot footage of the protests and the aftermath of the fraudulent election? But filmmakers have always overcome those obstacles. Filmmakers have never allowed. We've seen political films made all over the world. I can't imagine, though, it's easy right now to make a film in Belarus or Russia or Iran, or so oppressive regimes certainly prevent a lot of great stories from being made. I don't know that anything is necessarily taboo in terms of filmmaking. There's so many brave filmmakers. A lot of filmmakers are like journalists, and there are so many brave filmmakers and journalists putting their lives at risk, telling stories that are dangerous to be told. That's a really good question. I don't know. I have an answer beyond that, but it's worth considering.
Mm. Okay. Here's another interesting question. How do you see VOD, television VOD, as an option for selling or renting a documentary directly to an audience post-COVID? This question's by Mrinal Kapadia. Is it a good option?
Well, sure. If you can sell it to one of the bigger platforms, that's remarkable. I think that, yeah, it's definitely a great option. I know, as I've said before, that cinemas and festivals, particularly in North America and Europe, have had trouble making the transition to the digital platforms. They've had trouble not in their own capacity to do so, but in their ability to attract audiences. So again, it's harder to get someone to pay for one film, pull out their credit card and punch in their numbers to get one film when they have a subscription to another provider and can just turn on the TV and make their choice. So it's a challenge, but it's very early days. We've only been online, these festivals and cinemas that I talked about, for 6 months. So, you know, that's a very short window to get a clear sense that there isn't a lot more possible. Again, when we started HotDocs, it was tiny. Our audiences were tiny. When we opened our cinema, the audiences were tiny. Now we're online. The audiences are better than tiny, but not by much. And it might be something that resolves itself over time, or that we're able to.
I have a question that's slightly related to a couple of the questions that have been asked, which is that, do streaming platforms and VOD platforms naturally gravitate to, they have a natural bias towards a certain kind of subject? And maybe the question that Reena asked earlier, which was that it's not that certain documentaries cannot be made. Maybe they're not made because the filmmakers feel, you know, this is never going to pay for itself. So do they have a natural bias towards certain films? For instance, emotional subjects. That's only one of the many ways to make documentaries. You know? You can have a very esoteric film and it can be wonderful. So do they have because they have to appeal to a huge viewership, they end up cutting certain films out?
Definitely. And I would say that, you know, we talked about subtitles before. I know that that's an issue, and sometimes it takes a lot of convincing to get some of these big platforms to consider films with subtitles. Films that do well theatrically, and I believe on these platforms, films about music, art, design, culture, travel. We at the cinema had, when we look at films for the cinema, it's like we're in the retail business, and we've got to find product that sells. So there is a commercial element to what we're doing. We'd love to have a smaller cinema so that we wouldn't always have to try and attract 150 people on average to stay successful. But looking for films that, one of the categories of films that we found did really well were what we call virtual tourism, did really well at our cinema. So films that, you know, a film about Venice, a film about the Sagrada Familia church in Barcelona, films about India, films that take people to places virtually, a film about the Camino Trail that people hike in Europe and have been hiking for hundreds of years. So with the Camino as an example, it was a place that, you know, at least in North America, people have heard of. Your neighbor went on the Camino or planned on going, or you thought about going. You go on these like 3-6 week hikes, and you walk like pilgrims through the mountains in Western Europe, Spain or Portugal or Southern France. Anyway, so it would, you know, if you can't do it, or if you have done it, you're going to be interested in a film like this. Films about pets,
Of course.
or Kedi, the film about the cats in Istanbul.
Yeah.
So those are more commercial examples. They're not films that are necessarily changing the world, but we don't have to be changing the world all the time.
Right. Rajat Gandharva asks, do you feel the line between documentaries and mainstream films will reduce any day? Is there a line to begin with?
Yeah, well, in terms of you know, I think the rules about documentaries and what constitutes a documentary have changed, and they've relaxed. I mean, I remember when recreations were seen as an abomination in the old school documentary telling.
You had to put a label to say this is reconstruction, and people don't do that anymore. Yeah.
That's right. And now they're very commonplace, and you're seeing animation used in place of a formal recreation with actors. So I think the filmmakers are getting much more creative in terms of what constitutes a documentary. And I think audiences are becoming much more open-minded in terms of what they will accept. And at the same time, I think a lot of feature films you're seeing are being driven by real life characters and real life stories. So they're coming together in multiple ways and on different levels. HotDocs, we try to show everything that documentary is doing. So we don't have a hard and fast rule, like there can be no recreations and no voiceovers. And it's funny, if you think about documentary, it's just a way of telling a story and keeping your audience engaged so that they can get to the end of the story. And sometimes that involves animation, and sometimes that involves recreation. And it's just, they're devices that are designed to keep the viewer engaged in the story. So it's almost like anything is fair game, as long as there are some tenets of documentary that are still in place. Like, you don't make fun of people, you don't misrepresent what you're doing to somebody on film. You respect even if they're a deplorable person, there is a certain degree of respect that you have to bring as a storyteller or a filmmaker. So there are some rules that stay in place, others that are more mutable.
Another slightly tangential question I had is the phenomenon of deep fake technology. It's really becoming a very scary thing. Do you think it will impact documentary in any way at all?
Horrifying to think that's a possibility. I don't know the answer, but it's scary to think that it might.
Mm-hmm. Let me see if there are any. Okay. Okay, Deepti Gupta, who's a filmmaker. She's a cinematographer and a filmmaker. Hi, Deepti. She made a film called Shut Up Sona on a well-known singer, Sona Mohapatra. It was premiered at HotDocs.
It was great film.
So she says, it was a fabulous collaboration with the HotDocs team. We signed up for a UK sales agent through Doc Shop, so thank you. But does an online presence in multiple festivals impact sales on platforms or broadcasters or VODs, in your opinion, aside from having the film at major festivals? I can repeat that if you want. Does an online presence at multiple festivals impact sales on platforms or broadcasters or VOD?
I don't think so. I think it would only have a positive impact, to be honest. I think as a filmmaker, to be able to say my film screened at these prestigious festivals, the audiences are not large enough to have an impact on a distributor or a sales agent or a broadcaster buying a film or a platform, one of those streaming platforms, because the audiences aren't big enough to have an impact. So I don't think festivals, I would worry about festival exposure.
Right.
And congratulations again on a great film.
Meg asks, do you see merit in creating a response system through which one can see what impact a documentary is making beyond being watched? For instance, the impact of Game Changers on men's lifestyle post-viewing.
Definitely. And there are some organizations that track social impact that actually work with films to create a social impact campaign, and then also track the results of their campaigns. So they're able to say, this many viewers, this many students, these many politicians saw the film. So they're coming up with ways to track the impact on the audience, not just eyeballs and bums and seats, but actually, how did this film change people's minds? Did it change policies, etc.? Apparently, and one last point, apparently films about food have the highest incidents of social impact, behavioral change. So somebody watches a film about any subject, but food is the one that they're able to actually respond. They do respond to most readily and are able to respond to most readily. Sorry, I interrupted you, but.
Yeah, no, so some of the subjects that you spoke about, like food, travel, are also picked up by lifestyle channels, so-called lifestyle channels. Discovery,
Absolutely.
Animal Planet, even BBC. So a lot of independent documentary filmmakers are also competing with television in a major way, right?
Absolutely, definitely. But these are sort of long, a film about a long form documentary,
Right.
creative documentary about, the Camino or the Sagrada Familia is different than, what a more formulaic thing. Not that some of those nature shows aren't incredible, because they are, but I think they're different animals, so to speak.
Right. Okay, one last question. If anybody has any more questions, they have 2 minutes to send them. We'll just take this one for now. Omkar Kadamkar asks, I am at early stage of fundraising for a non-profit design agency. He would like to know tips and guidelines on sustainable fundraising. And he wants you to share your advice for an aspiring storyteller, whichever question you want to take.
Well, in terms of fundraising, which is what my background was, professional background started in fundraising, I always say, you're selling yourself. People give to people rather than organizations. So having a connection with, it's like sales. You've got to believe in the product. You've got to get people excited about your product. My product happens to be documentary. It's not so hard. You've got to under promise and over deliver. You've got to, well, I always say that when you're talking with somebody and when you're pitching somebody, let's say as a filmmaker or an arts administrator or a fundraiser, watch how, watch people's reaction to what you're saying. And as soon as you see them sort of like you're talking about something, let's say I'm pitching HotDocs and I'm talking about one aspect of what we do, and I can sort of see that the person is becoming less engaged. Start talking about something else. Like pay attention. People give you cues when you're talking to them, and as soon as you see somebody becoming maybe less interested in a subject, change to something else, and do that until you land on something that interests them, something about what you're doing that interests them, and then go from there. But people give to people. So, and talk to as many people as you can. You never know where a good idea is going to come from, or a good introduction or whatever. So be open to ideas and to talking to people. And I always say, and it's different because I run a nonprofit arts organization, share information. Don't hoard your secrets to success. Be generous, and that's going to come back in your favor at some point in time.
But that's also a lot of hats for a poor documentary filmmaker to wear. You're making
Yes.
the film, you have to worry about how you're pitching and so on. Has the pressure on documentary filmmakers eased over the years? Because it's sometimes filmmakers, they just want to make their films and that's it.
It's not.
Is the ecosystem around independent filmmakers improved just to allow them to work?
Yes and no. I'd say that it's never been an easy way to make a living ever, unless you lived in Western Europe 20 years ago, where there's lots of public funding for films. Canada has public funding for films, not as robust as Europe, and the United States has even less. Every country is different in terms of how they've set themselves up. You're right. I did give a lot of. I was answering the question. It sounded like he was talking about his company, his business, in terms of fundraising. But for filmmakers, passion, curiosity, and that I think is gonna, and talent. But those two things, passion and curiosity, I think are really important. You got to get people excited about, and this applies to filmmaking. You got to get people, financiers, excited about your project.
We have a couple of questions on funding. These are India related, and I'm not sure I mean, funding for documentaries in India, I'm not honestly sure this is the best forum for that.
While you're thinking about that, I wanted to add HotDocs. One of the things we do to help filmmakers is I've tried to start an Indian fund without success so far, but we have in the last 12 years raised over $10 million from the private sector and created different funding envelopes for filmmakers, and we provide grants. So there's one called Cross Currents, which is information available on our website, for which filmmakers based in India are eligible. We have another film called the HotDocs Blue Eyes Fund that is a mentorship and granting fund for filmmakers living and working in Africa. We've got a number of Canadian funds. So a lot of the big festivals, or not enough of the big festivals, but some, including us, have created granting systems, have started to raise money that we provide in grants to filmmakers in full recognition that this is a tough way to make a living. And our job is, HotDocs has a mandate to showcase documentaries, so to celebrate this particular art form. And the second part of our mandate is to help filmmakers get their films made. And we do that through professional development, all the market events that we do at the festival, where we bring buyers and sellers together, and then through these funds that I mentioned, where we actually give grants to filmmakers with projects in development.
So is this the work that you do with the Indian Documentary Foundation? There's a question. I don't know whether they mean IDFA, the Indian Documentary Producers Association, or the Documentary Foundation. But do you have any collaboration with something, an organization?
We've been trying in collaboration with them to establish a fund for filmmakers living and working in India, and it's still a work in progress.
Right.
But yeah, we'd love to help if possible. And we've been trying to raise money either in India for this particular fund, or through Indo-Canadians living in Canada. And again, it's a work in progress, but it's something we'd love to see happen.
Right. This is a question related to academics, education. Do you believe that documentary as a genre is given equal importance as features in universities and colleges?
No, but I'll say in Canada, we're seeing, in Toronto specifically, we probably have half a dozen big universities and colleges, all of whom now have programs for documentaries, like degrees in documentary filmmaking, which didn't exist, I don't think, 25 years ago. So there has been a real shift, and I think that trend is something we might see internationally. Because documentaries are cool, they're hot, they're interesting, they're vital.
This question is from Rashmi Lamba. HotDocs has a brilliant partner circle for high net worth individuals. I think this is the thing that you just spoke about, who fund and support documentaries. Could you talk a little bit more perhaps about, since a lot of people are very keen on figuring out how Indian funders, Indian producers can come forward and support documentaries?
I'd love to. Hi, Rashmi. Yes, it's a great project. And it's based, there's one in New York called Impact Partners. There's one in Chicago called Chicago Media Project. And what we did was, so we started it's called HotDocs Partners. And this is something that could work really well in India also. And I've talked to our friends at MAMI and others about setting up something like this, or at least sharing our best practices and letting somebody else start this up. But in Toronto, we have 8 individuals and 2 foundations who are part of HotDocs Partners. Each of the partners has agreed to investing, I'll use US dollars, $40,000 a year for 3 years in documentaries. So we bring them projects in development. We vet the projects. We're looking to be the last investor in. We actually want to be very much on the top tier of recoupment. And we help bring them the projects. We present our slate to them, and each of our 10 investors would have different motivations. So some might be, you know, I just want films about the environment. I don't care if I make any money. Somebody else might say, no, I want to make as much money as, I mean, no one's greedy. None of these 10 people think they're going to get rich off this, by the way. I think if they all broke even, they'd be thrilled. But they believe in documentaries so much, and they believe in these stories and these filmmakers, that they're investing in films. So we've had 5 films that the partners have invested in so far, 3 of which had their world premiere at Sundance. Once Upon a Time in Venezuela, Influence, and Softy, all of which were subsequently invited to HotDocs. So those 3 films, I mean, you can't really get much better than a world premiere at Sundance. And then we have 2 more that are, one that's premiering at, I think I can talk about it, at the Toronto International Film Festival. It's Werner Herzog's new film. Wow. And a 5th one that is unannounced. But it's basically a group of people who love documentaries, who have a little bit of disposable income and want to help get these projects made. Some of them want to go to these film festivals and see their name up in the screen and meet the filmmakers, which is wonderful. Who wouldn't? But it's just another way. And that's how the marketplace has changed and continues to change. Who knew that, you know, you could set up something like this in Toronto? The wonderful thing is you can set it up anywhere in the world, right? If you can find enough people, half a dozen or 10 or more, who love documentaries and want to help filmmakers get their films finished. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful marriage. It's a wonderful marriage of philanthropy and artists. And we are the matchmakers. So we're not involved financially in any of the back end. We're really acting as an agent who's saying, you know, you might want to see Nandini's film because, you know, she's sold it, her last film, to Netflix. She gets invited to festivals all over the world. It's a subject you care about. Anyway, it's a wonderful program. It's called HotDocs Partners. If anybody is interested in starting up something like this anywhere in the world, feel free to let me know and we'll make all of our resources available to you.
So one last question. Are there any Indians who are willing to put money on the table for any Indian entrepreneurs that you have come across, hanging around at the market or?
I've pitched the idea of an Indian fund to many philanthropists, unsuccessfully so far. But this HotDocs Partners is a newer initiative that happened independently from that. But we just started another fund, $500,000 donated by a Canadian philanthropist who is very passionate about music. So this money is grants specifically for films about Canadian musical artists. So these philanthropists are often tying their gift to subjects that they're passionate about, which is perfect. So, but yeah, I'd love to start one in India or help somebody else start one in India, either a straight grant or an equity partnership.
Okay. We have many more questions, but unfortunately not enough time for them. Chris, that was really wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Asad, and thank you, Team Avid, for making this happen.
Thanks, Team Avid, and thanks, Nandini. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini and Chris. Guys, this was like, I think of it as a 2.0 for me. You know, Chris, if you remember, you did an Avid workshop in 2015 on new frontiers in storytelling. And it was one of those experiences we wanted to kind of get to the next stage, in which we then approached the Canadian consulate and said, hey, let's get Chris back. And Nandini has been part of Avid's journey since it kind of began in some sort of, advisory role through our previous avatars, for lack of better words. But thank you guys for being here. Thank you to Maithili and the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai. It comes in full circle, as they say, right? I mean, driving with Selvi, with Elisa Pulowski, was my first project I actually worked on with the Canadian Consulate. And we had done a masterclass at Kalagoda. And I think that was about 2014, perhaps. I'm sorry, I'm really blurry with the dates. But great to see that we're all still kind of connected, collaborating. And thank you all for your support, and a special thank you to the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai, to Maithili, to Annie, to Ali Khan for actually collaborating with us. And we actually have a slew of collaborations with Canada. So people might think I'm Canadian more, but I'm a US citizen actually. But on that note, to our participants, thank you for attending this session and being part of an engaged discussion. This won't make any sense if it wasn't for you. Stay tuned. There's so many more exciting programs from Avid coming. And part of this week's, all things film programming, we have a very interesting live session on screenwriting for the digital media with screenwriter and director Satyanshu Singh, who's again, an avid favorite and has been part of our journey over the past 10 years. To find out more, just kind of tune in to or follow us on our social media handles at Avid Learning, or check out our website. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember that learning never stops. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.